In the spring of 1979, when I was 24, I wound up homeless on the streets of Brooklyn due to my penchant for taking lots of barbiturates and not being able to hold a job. I started to sleep on the F train, riding from Coney Island to 179th Street in Jamaica over and over again. I was in such a daze that I did not even know I could go to a shelter, much less apply for welfare or food stamps. After a few days of this, my friend Brad took the train down from Washington Heights and rescued me. I knew Brad from college. We'd met at the Pratt Film Department and had become drinking and drugging partners, but he'd managed to keep a roof over his head. He was a hard-drinking redneck from Florida who could by turns play Chopin by ear or beat the shit out of someone who displeased him. He found me sitting on a stoop on Washington Avenue and he took me to the Greek diner around the corner for a meal. We sat and ordered food, the first I'd eaten in days. I looked dirty and I knew I smelled. I was embarrassed, but hungry enough not to worry too much about it. "You can move into the garage with me," Brad said. At the time, he was living in an empty garage attached to a building complex in Washington Heights. "You can stay with me, but you have to do whatever I tell you, help out with the work, and take whatever money, and take whatever I give you from the money I make. Can you handle that?" I wanted to tell him to go fuck himself, but I heard myself say meekly through tears, "Okay, Brad, I'll do whatever you say." He smirked and said, "Oh, look at you, you're crying. Are you grateful? Are you ready to stop being a load and learn to pull your own weight?" In addition to being a load, Brad also referred to me as a buffoon and would sometimes tell me I made him sick. I wondered why he was bothering to help me if I disgusted him so much. I wanted to punch him in the face, but I knew he could kick my ass. He was a Golden Gloves champ in addition to being an artist. I just wanted to eat the food he bought for me and get to this garage so I could finally take a shower. I hadn't bathed in days. "Yeah, Brad, whatever you say." I hated myself more than ever for accepting his help, but my sense of self-preservation was stronger than my dignity at this point. I cleaned my plate with a piece of bread and was ready for the long ride to Washington Heights. I didn't sleep for a month for the first month I spent at the garage. Since I had been using barbiturates almost daily for 3 years, sleep did not come easy. It was my first real drug withdrawal. Brad got $30 every weekend for taking the garbage down from the buildings the garage was attached to, and he was getting a little extra cash cleaning out vacated apartments. That was what the two of us lived on. The place was called River House, 5 7-story buildings that sat on the ridge of Riverside Drive and overlooked the Hudson. There were actually 2 garages, a big functioning one that the tenants used and had attendants and everything, and the one we lived in. At a lower level and further down the hill that was 158th Street, closer to Broadway. Our garage consisted of a few rooms just off the top of a steep ramp from the street, and the cavernous, empty space that held a dozen cars and vans that had been found abandoned on the street. There was no shower in the garage, just a toilet and 1 sink, 1 bowl, and 2 urinals. We had a wash in the sink. Sometimes we had access to some of the empty apartments upstairs, and whenever we could, we would take showers in them. It beat dry washing in the sink. We found everything we needed in the garbage: towels, soap, shampoo, a new mattress for me, sheets, an old quilt, a real down pillow, a 13-inch black and white TV, our coffee table, new old clothes for me, even a noisy old fridge we kept outside the room in the garage proper since it was too noisy to keep inside our 10 by 12 foot room. Not that we had much food to put in it, it was mainly used to keep our beer cold. The owners had advertised these rooms as artist spaces, and people that answered the ads were told they could either pay rent or work for the space. Brad had chosen work. A guy named Fernie sort of managed the garage and made sure we did the required work. There was also a Puerto Rican auto mechanic, Ramon, to fix the abandoned cars Fernie would find abandoned in the streets. I never inquired what was done with the cars after. Gradually, we started to do more stuff for the owners, like painting vacated apartments. We became the house painters for River House. The owners paid us 7 cents per square foot. They threw in the horrible oil-based paint and supplies for free. We spent what little money we made on beer and food. There was a Chinese Cuban diner that was open 24 hours a day on Broadway and 157th Street, and we could get a pint of rice and beans for 75 cents. There were also donuts from a donut place on Broadway, and we got a dozen donuts for half price after midnight. What was more important to us was a 40-ounce bottle of Old English 800 each and a pack of Camels to split between the two of us. With the little money we earned, we were able to subsist on this: rice and beans, donuts, beer, and cigarettes. I hated Camels. I hated all non-menthol cigarettes, but I had no choice in the matter. Until I could start making my own money, I was dependent on Brad's whims and tastes. In the evenings, after we painted or removed furniture from a vacated apartment or whatever it was we were doing that day, we would take our bottles of Old English and sit on the grass by the river underneath Riverside Drive and drink, watching the cars lazily drive over the George Washington Bridge. Life sucks, doesn't it, Xavier? Yeah, Brad, life sucks, I would tiredly repeat by rote. Hey, I bet you wish you could have a nice steak dinner right about now, wouldn't you? I couldn't even remember the last time I ate steak. Yeah, sure, Brad. Well, that's just one more thing you just can't have. You just can't have was one of our favorite expressions. Anytime we saw something desirable that we could not afford, we would look at each other and say simultaneously, just one more thing you just can't have. We could have been a comedy duo if we hadn't been such pitiful creatures. One day he announced he was going upstate to skydive for the weekend, and I was to do the garbage by myself. I was to get the entire 30 bucks. I was planning on buying a couple of cartons of menthol cigarettes. River House was a totally weird place, at least the underground part of it. Because of the topography of the area, and the 5 basements were at different levels, in order to get the garbage out, I had to start at the furthest most building, which is at the highest level. I had a big canvas and steel cart that held 15 or so big black plastic garbage bags. I would start out in the compactor room of that furthest building and start collecting bags. When the cart was full, I would push it through the basement, taking the freight elevator down 1 level, through another basement, down 2 levels, up another level, down through another basement, and finally out onto 158th Street, where I made a neat pile of black plastic garbage bags on the sidewalk. One time I counted 74 bags of garbage. It took an average of 3 hours to get it all out, and I wondered if I'd be doing this forever. In one of the sub-basements, there was a huge cavernous room that I had to traverse to get to an elevator. The space beneath the building was at least 30 feet high, with giant columns 5 feet square supporting the roof. In the middle of the floor, there was a huge hole, so big and dark you could not see the bottom. Beside the hole was a big pile of debris, brick, dirt, and crumbled concrete. There seemed to be tons of it. I found out the owners were paying $1 a wheelbarrow to fill the hole. There were 2 or 3 empty wheelbarrows next to the debris pile. Nobody, not even Brad, had been crazy enough to take on the project. I found my new source of independent. I found my way out. I was going to fill that hole with rubble until I could make enough money to become a real person again and not depend on Brad. I would work all day tossing wheelbarrow after wheelbarrow of debris into that hole. There must have been tons of it, like I said before, and I just kept dumping load after load of it in the hole until the rag that I wore over my nose and mouth was so encrusted with dust I couldn't breathe anymore, all for $1 a load. But it was better than 7 cents a square foot. Eventually, I made enough money that I started going downtown by myself without Brad, and I convinced my brother Luis, who would not even open the door for me when I became homeless, to let me stay with him in the East Village. Luis and Brad had become fast buddies, and Brad had taken him skydiving one weekend. I was invited, but I wasn't really interested in jumping out of airplanes. I moved out of the garage and into my brother's 6th floor St. Mark's Place walk-up, and I slept on the floor. I got a job in the warehouse of a shoe store an ex-girlfriend of mine had been fired from. I knew the manager, and he took pity on me and offered me work. I hadn't even asked him for a job. I just dropped by the store to say hello. Then one day, Brad showed up at the apartment. He'd beaten the shit out of Ramon, the Puerto Rican auto mechanic, and he couldn't stay at the garage anymore. Ramon said he was going to go home and get his gun, and I don't want to take the chance that he might really have one. You guys have a new roommate. Not to sound ungrateful, but having Brad for a roommate was probably the last thing Luis and I wanted. Brad was the big dog, the alpha male, and it would soon be his apartment. I found a way out one drunken night when I looked at a TV guide and opened it to a full-page ad that said, "Be all you can be." It was an advertisement enticing young men to join the Army for a $3,000 bonus. I went to Whitehall Street the next day and I signed up. Now I was going to be a soldier.